Hello. Good morning if you're tuning in from the Americas, and good afternoon if you're joining us from Europe, Africa, or Asia. And welcome to this webinar on improving private sector energy efficiency. I'm Anna Watson, Head of Conference Production at Climate Action. And I will be hosting this webinar as part of a series of 3 others in the run-up to COP21 in Paris this December, exploring themes around the role of businesses in sustainable innovation. To let you know a little bit more about Climate Action, for the last 8 years we have worked on a unique contractual agreement with the UN Environment Programme to produce both their annual publication and sustainability-focused events. Our flagship event, the Sustainable Innovation Forum, has become the largest business-focused side event of the annual COP, and this year will come to Paris on the 7th and 8th of December to accompany the COP21 climate talks. The event is officially endorsed by the French government, and we expect to welcome over 800 delegates and 80 speakers to the extended 2-day event, hosted at the iconic Stade de France, just a short distance from the main COP21 negotiations. Current event sponsors include BMW, Carbon Trade Exchange, and today's webinar participants, Avery Dennison. We're also working with some great strategic partners, including the Latin American and Inter-American Development Banks and the European Investment Bank. I tell you this as it's free to pre-register to join us at the forum, so please visit the link below, and I hope that I might meet you in Paris this December. Without further ado, back to the topic at hand. Today we will be discussing improving private sector energy efficiency and hope to address the following points. What funding and opportunities are available to drive energy efficiency measures within businesses, and how tangible are the returns on this investment? How can global supply chains best incorporate energy efficiency measures across their operations? And finally, how can energy efficiency improvements be measured and managed to ensure ongoing improvement? And we have an excellent lineup of panellists who will be exploring their experience around these points. We have Helen Sahi, Head of Corporate Sustainability at Avery Dennison, and she will also be joined by Dan Weedle, Senior Director of Global Process Technology, also from Avery Dennison. Just to let you know a little bit more about Avery. Avery Dennison is a leading labelling and packaging materials. Avery Dennison is a global leader in labelling and packaging materials and solutions, with operations in more than 50 countries and 25,000 employees worldwide. Avery have endeavoured to implement an ambitious push towards achieving supply chain sustainability, and Helen and Dan will be sharing their experience of implementing energy efficiency across their wide-ranging operations. We'll also be joined by Terry Wills, who is Chief Executive Officer of the World Green Building Council. With over 100 green building councils globally, Terry will be sharing her experience of the policies and funding opportunities available to businesses to help them implement energy efficiency solutions. We want this webinar to be as interactive as possible, so if you'd like to ask us any questions, please submit them via Twitter using the hashtag CIF15 or follow climate_action_ to get all the latest updates from the webinar. We will endeavour to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar after our presentations. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Helen Sahi and Dan Weedle to discuss their experiences from Avery Dennison. Over to you, Helen and Dan.
Hello, Anna, can you hear me? All right, well, thank you, Anna, for that introduction, and thank you, everyone on the phone. As Anna had mentioned, Avery Dennison is comprised of, and you can read our overview, we have 3 business units: pressure-sensitive materials, or the materials group, as we call it, retail branding and information solutions, as well as Advansive. Today we're actually going to focus on the materials group business unit, and Dan Weedle is joining me for this, as he is the driver of this initiative in the materials group. Next page, Anna. Thank you. We'll talk a little bit about Avery Dennison from a corporate level, how did we set our goals? When did we set our goals? And then we'll dive into the materials group and how energy efficiency has played a role in our sustainability goals in that division. And then at the end, we'll go a little bit into the overall strategy again for the next 10 years. Next slide. As a little bit of background to everyone on the phone, Avery's been in business for 80 years, and our founder, Stan Avery, said that he could do more good by starting a good business than he could by starting a not-for-profit, which was his original intention. So sustainability has been part of our DNA for 80 years, but in 2007 we did put a formal sustainability governance structure in place that included our first sustainability charter and a sustainability steering committee. In 2009, we committed to sustainability goals publicly, and that's when we published our first sustainability report as well. And those goals included reduction of waste to landfill. It included greenhouse gas reduction and goals around producing more sustainable products and services. Our 2009 goals, though, expire in 2015, and at the end I'll go a little bit more into what our new goals are. But we did look at our goals and said, where are we going to be in 10 years, and more importantly, where do we want to be in 80 years? So we've placed our focus on areas where we can make the most difference, which still includes greenhouse gas reduction, reduction of waste to landfill, safety, philanthropic giving, paper, and a number of other goals. Next page, Anna. When we set our goals at a corporate level, and then our business units implement those goals. Our greenhouse gas reduction goals, and we'll concentrate on that today, is currently an indexed goal where we measure our CO2 emissions and index that to dollars sold. But as everyone knows on the phone, or maybe doesn't know, it's very difficult to translate that metric to the sales floor and to your manufacturing facilities. So we actually looked at energy consumption and energy reduction and included all our businesses, all our facilities, and all the energy sources, including natural gas, electricity, propane, and diesel. And by looking at energy, we were actually able to really drive some deep energy efficiency in the operations. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dan.
Okay. So as Helen mentioned, within the materials group business, we chose to address greenhouse gas reduction through energy efficiency first. And as she also stated, we kind of translated the corporate metric into something that was a little bit more tangible for a manufacturing organization. And we came up with a metric of energy intensity, which is defined as energy consumption per unit production or megawatt hours per million square meters of production. We focused predominantly on electricity and natural gas. They comprise the lion's share of our energy consumption and therefore greenhouse gas emissions. And initially we focused mostly on our heavy coating manufacturing sites. Again, they were more than 80% of our consumption and emissions, and we've since expanded that to our distribution network, so essentially our entire manufacturing footprint. So we set what I thought was a rather audacious goal back in 2007, which was a 30% reduction in that energy intensity metric by year-end 2015. So next slide. So the chart on the upper left shows our performance through that period. So you can read the bars represent that energy intensity metric, so megawatt hours per million square meters of production, and it's subdivided between natural gas and electricity, with natural gas being the larger component of our consumption. The axis on the right shows our percent reduction over that period, which is indicated by the blue line on the chart. So what you can see here is, 8 years into this journey, we've reduced our energy intensity by a third, so 33.3%, which bypassed our 2014 goal of 32%, and more importantly, already exceeded what we had set as our long-term objective in 2015, which was a 30% reduction. So again, as Helen mentioned, this is an indexed metric. I think it's also interesting to note that in absolute emissions terms, we reduced our consumption by more than 12% despite significant production unit growth through that period. So the next slide. All right, so this slide sort of lays out the strategy that we followed and the different components of our portfolio for reducing energy consumption. So the first key bullet point here is manufacturing footprint optimization. So in the normal course of business and running an efficient operation, we've recapitalized certain assets, culled certain inefficient assets out of our base, and then moved production to newer, more efficient assets, which of course has knock-on effects for energy efficiency. The second bullet point is around productivity. So a lot of that volume, as we've optimized that footprint, we've transferred a lot of that volume to existing assets, and in order to accept that volume, had to do quite a bit of work around utilization improvements on those assets. So again, the concept of making more with less, which certainly impacts energy intensity. And then the last bullet point under productivity is loss rates. So we've reduced our loss rates on the order of 25%, 2007 through 2014. And then, of course, the final main bullet point there, the things that people think of probably more traditionally when it comes to energy efficiency in industry. We did complete quite a few projects specifically targeted at improving energy efficiency. Early on in the journey, 2007, 2008, we mapped a lot of our opportunities by going out to our manufacturing sites and conducting energy blitzes to identify opportunities for energy reduction. We then developed and prioritized that list so that we could start executing on these projects. I have a bit of a laundry list here of the different types of projects that we executed. Some of them were very simple, procedural and maintenance. Things as simple as having appropriate plant and equipment shutdown procedures when equipment is idle or during off shifts to save energy. The second bullet point, process optimization, was actually very impactful. So this didn't necessarily involve any capital investments or augmentation of our equipment, but really just optimizing the setup and operation of a lot of our equipment to reduce its energy intensity. A great example of that is our convection dryers, which consume a great deal of natural gas. Basically, we worked very intensely on the many dryers we have out there in our footprint at reducing the amount of exhaust and therefore waste heat that we're sending out the stacks of our plants. We, of course, did go through some capital investments as well. Some key examples are waste heat recovery. Again, another good example there being with these convection dryers, where we've minimized the exhaust rate already, then recapturing and repurposing the heat that we weren't able to eliminate. Free cooling systems for chill water, of course, in our large facilities, the high bay lighting and converting as much of that away from metal halide lighting as possible, and then things like process steam elimination, so trying to get rid of some of the boilers in our facilities. Another point I wanted to make was around recapitalization or attrition of a lot of our equipment. So we made it a policy that as we were recapitalizing components within our assets, within our broader assets, that we would do so selecting a more energy efficient option. So a great example of that is as we're replacing obsolete DC drive and motors that drive our equipment, we're migrating towards more energy efficient AC systems. And last but not least, we've taken all of these best practices and things that we've learned through this process, and we've sort of baked that into the design of our new assets. So from the word go, we're putting these new assets in place with these energy efficiency best practices. Next slide. So a little bit about how we're organized from a personnel standpoint, accountability and organization. So as we stated up front, as a business, we had a very broad goal and metric set. But then on a year-on-year basis, within performance plans, specific metrics are set all the way from the top that are operations VPs worldwide and regional, and then cascaded down to our regional operations leaders, and then down into the manufacturing plants as well. Within each of our operating regions, we also appointed leaders to sort of drive the initiative, track the project, and report on the energy efficiency metrics, which we could then roll up to the global level. And last but not least, all of these projects that we identified were prioritized and executed by our global, regional, and local engineering and maintenance teams that are very well networked for best practice sharing. And so maybe my closing point here is that these projects were executed and produced really solid returns. So we've, as an organization, had tremendous cost savings since 2007. Very high-level estimate is on the order of $80 million in energy savings cumulative through that period. And a lot of these improvements have been realized with negligible investment. So a lot of the examples that I cited around changing procedures and optimizing processes had little or no capital investment to execute. However, where we did need to deploy capital, those projects were able to meet similar investment hurdles as non-energy efficiency projects. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Helen.
Thanks, Dan. As you can see, Dan's done some great work in the materials group and continues to do some great work for Avery Dennison. And as we look forward, we have to look backwards as well. And we've been around, as I said, for 80 years, and we want to continue doing business for at least 80 years and beyond. So in February 2014, knowing that our goals would expire at the end of 2015, we spent approximately 10 months taking a look at what that future would look like. And at the onset, we said, what should our goals be in 2020? And we said 2020 is just around the corner. Let's really look at where are our goals going to be in 10 years from now. So we looked at the business and said, where does Avery Dennison want to be in 10 years? Those goals will be public in September, but I'll give you a preview. Is when we looked at where we are today, where we want to be, we said, where are there areas that we need to focus on that we aren't currently focused on? Where do we continue our efforts, and what are some of the new areas that we need to look at? So reducing greenhouse gas emissions will continue to be a focus, both in our operations and now in our supply chain as well. Our goals for 2015 were around Scope 1 and Scope 2. We also will have goals for 2025 around Scope 3. But our goals will not be indexed going forward. They will be absolute reduction goals. But we'll also look at products and solutions and how carbon intensive are our products and solutions, whether that includes products and solutions with paper, film, chemicals, what's the waste generated by the operations or the design of those products and solutions. And we're again committing to be transparent about those goals and transparent of our progress towards those goals. So the punchline is we are planning to be around for a long time. We know that business as usual can't be business as usual. We need to take a look at sustainability, take a look at how that fits into our overall business plan, and then really drive some change. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Anna.
Hello, thank you, Helen. Thank you, Dan. That was a really interesting overview. I'd now like to welcome our next speaker, Terry Wills, who will be discussing her experience from working with the World Green Building Council. So thank you, and over to you, Terry.
Thanks so much. Can you hear me?
Sorry, Terry.
So.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, good, good. Always important to check.
Sure.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining today, and thank you also so much to Helen and Dan. It's very impressive work at Avery Dennison that you're doing, and really looking forward to seeing what the next era of goals will look like. It's really inspirational for other companies. So as Anna mentioned, I'm Terry Wills. I'm the CEO of the World Green Building Council. Next slide, please. We are a network of 100 green building councils who are greening buildings through market transformation all around the world. Our GBCs, as we call them, are working with corporate members to advance their own building plans, certifying buildings through rating tools such as Green Star, LEED, BREEAM, and others around the world, and also advocating for green policy, green building policy at a local, at a city level, regional, and also at a global level. I also wanted to thank Climate Action for hosting us today and generally contributing to the dialogue on climate change, particularly the role that buildings and companies can play as we approach the COP at the end of the year. Our green building councils are very interested in getting involved in this process all around the world. But I think what they're finding, like me, is that on the road to Paris, as everyone says, we're hearing a lot about the climate treaty and the negotiations, and if you're like us, you're getting a bit confused maybe about all the terminologies and acronyms and data and meetings, and there's INDCs and ADPs and UNFCCC and IPCC, you get the point, et cetera, et cetera. So the next slide, please, Anna. But in our view, it's actually quite simple. It's recently economics professor Jeffrey Sachs said, we have 6 months to save the world. And we believe that green buildings can help. So what is a green building? A question we often get. And I love this image on this slide by Vincent Caillebout, who's a French architect, and it's of Paris in 2050 and what it should look like. And it's clearly green. But apart from the color green, we often hear, what does green actually mean? And more importantly, how can we transform markets to become green? Well, first, our view at the World Green Building Council is that a green building takes an intelligent approach to energy. Similar to everything that we heard just now from Avery Dennison. A green building's design creates natural energy efficiencies to minimize usage as much as possible, while also integrating renewable and low-carbon technologies, reducing reliance on the grid, particularly important when the grid isn't clean, like it is in many countries. But green buildings aren't just about energy. They also safeguard our water resources. They minimize waste and maximize reuse. They keep our landscape green, recognizing that our urban environment should preserve nature and ensure diverse wildlife. They also need to be resilient, adapting to a changing environment and increasing hazards such as flooding, which will keep people and their belongings safe if resilient. And that while also achieving resource and natural preservation, buildings are also happy and healthy places to work. So now we all want every building we live, work, and play in to be green and energy efficient, right? So next slide. Which is good because we need the demand, because global greenhouse gas emissions from buildings now comprises 30% of the world's total emissions. And that could double, or even that could significantly increase if we don't significantly address energy from buildings currently. And it's also not surprising, considering that we all live, work, go to school in buildings. So we really have to figure out how we can make a difference and start dramatically increasing energy efficiency and decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. So the question is, how do we do this? Well, in our view, it's through essentially 3 ways. The first is leadership. We know that green building is the right thing to do. But of course, we also know that there will be challenges. So leadership is required to get past the barriers, to focus on the end goal and galvanize efforts to plow through when the going is tough, similar to how Avery Dennison has really done it. Some great examples, some other examples as well. Tony Malkin, some of you may know, you've heard of, the owner of the Empire State Building, who undertook a gargantuan retrofit of this impressive building, working with the Clinton Climate Initiative, and paid his investment back in under 4 years, and since has really served as an inspiration to future leadership all over the world. There's also Cohen van Ostrom, who's the CEO of a company called OVG, who has built what is now called the greenest office building in the world in the Netherlands. And even in the UK, where I am, even Marks and Spencer's, who have their program called Plan A and have green buildings all over the country. But we also see that leadership isn't just at a project level. One of the best routes to large-scale transformation for energy efficiency in buildings is through policy, and there's some tremendous examples of this at different levels of government. So at the national level, as an example, France has recently mandated that all building rooftops must have either solar PV or green roofs. And in cities like Paris, with an urban heat island effect, green roofs can reduce temperatures by as much as 2 degrees in the summer if prevalent enough across the city, which can in turn reduce the energy consumed by air conditioning in buildings. So it has a significant impact on energy efficiency. At the state level, California has set a plan that from 2020, building code will almost require new homes to be net zero, consuming and generating energy for a grand sum of net zero energy consumption. And at a city level, we've seen a city like Tokyo has implemented a really exciting program, which is a cap and trade for their large-scale building emitters. The program introduced 2 compliance periods, each over 4 years, so the whole program over 8 years. And during the first compliance period, 70% of the buildings had met the target for the second compliance period already, reducing energy usage by as much as 23%, which shows us that long-term policy certainty can also significantly drive action in the private sector. If you know you're going to have to do something in the future, you might as well do it now, especially if you're going to save money from it. And finally, third, the way to get to market transformation we see is also through the business case. And the more we, with our green building councils and businesses, can quantify, capture, and disseminate the business case, the greater the market transformation. GBCs around the world administer 23 different ratings tools which certify buildings and help to create the business case for going green. We've also just launched an initiative called Better Places for People, which aims to raise awareness of how buildings can impact upon health and well-being, which in turn encourages those who design, build, own, occupy, operate, or sell buildings to shape them for the benefit of people. An example from the research in this project shows that improved air quality in a building can improve productivity by as much as 11%. And we really need to tell these stories around the world. But also we have to recognize that the business case isn't just about fancy office buildings. And Anna, if you can slip to the next slide. It's also about homes and places of work all over the world that are not only combating climate change, but also supporting societal and economic goals in places like this Green Street, which is in a place called Cato Manor in Durban in South Africa. And here, houses are cheaper to fuel. They're saving money for food and education as a result. Houses are cleaner inside as they use clean energy cook stoves, which eliminate harmful fumes which can lead to lung illness. And they create green employment for the economies of the future. So this is an example beyond office buildings, but also how green homes, green buildings all around the world can make a difference. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope I've given you a taste of how you can all help us change the world through green building. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that presentation, Terry. The floor is now open to questions from the audience, and I've received one through that's aimed at both Helen and Dan. Some comments we've seen have sort of mentioned that improving energy efficiency is sort of grabbing the low-hanging fruit in terms of making business improvements, as opposed to implementing greater sustainability measures across organisations. Helen, you hinted that Avery Dennison are taking quite a wide overview in the last slide of your presentation. How would you respond in terms of sort of people thinking that energy efficiency really isn't going far enough?
Yeah, thanks, Anna, and thank you for that question. You know, as the World Bank said, I think it was in November, energy efficiency is everywhere and nowhere at the same time, and we see energy efficiency, and this is not just at Avery Dennison, but globally, that there is a lot of work that's being done in the energy efficiency arena, but then there's a lot of areas where there's a lot to be done. If you look at lighting, there's still a lot of lighting that needs to be changed out, and the technology around lighting is continuously changing. A lot of work around commissioning, or what I would call continuous commissioning, has not been done. Providing visibility to real-time live visibility into what energy you are using and where it's being used. So especially in a manufacturing setting where you can actually move production to make the whole manufacturing process more efficient. Really engaging the employees, especially the ones that are using the equipment and see it every day, in the dialogue of how do we make this process more efficient. And as Dan said, you know, there's a lot of work that has been done at Avery Dennison, being Avery Dennison specific, but there's always more work that can be done, and every time a new energy blitz or Kaizen is run, we're always finding new things where we can actually save energy.
Sure. Great, thank you for that response. Did you want to add anything, Dan?
Yeah, certainly I will. So I think you can kind of see it if you go back to the trend in the graph that I presented. Our improvement year on year has been very steady throughout that 8-year period. So one might have expected that as we got 2, 3, 4, 5 years into the journey that we'd start to see an abating of the rate of improvement year on year. But we continue to turn up more and more compelling opportunities, and so even though we've reduced our energy intensity already by a third, we've still got some dry powder, so we still have opportunities out there.
Great. And another question actually for you, Dan, whilst I've got you there. You've mentioned that you saved sort of $80 million via energy efficiency improvements, some of which that cost very little or even nothing. So I just wondered if you could maybe share with our listeners some of the elements that you addressed that made the most impact, but perhaps at the lowest cost.
Certainly. I think the most striking example there is around reducing waste heat. So one of the elements of most of our big manufacturing lines are these large convection dryers. And since we're typically flashing off a carrier solvent from some of our coatings, we need to have an airflow. And so then that airflow needs to go somewhere and carry away the solvent. So a natural artifact of our process is to have this waste heat stream. And we were able to address a significant portion of that simply via some tweaks to the process and minimizing that exhaust stream without compromising the efficiency or quality of the process and the output product. And just to kind of put a number on it, so if I look at the total amount of natural gas that we've mitigated or reduced, about a quarter of that came strictly from that process, which essentially cost us nothing more than the engineering time to go in and investigate each of these dryers on a one-off basis and implement those changes.
Great, thank you, Dan. That's very interesting. Terry, just had a question through. I mean, obviously, the need for green buildings is very important. In terms of encouraging businesses to embrace green building sort of credentials and make their businesses more sustainable, have you seen any particular sort of policies or available funding that have encouraged particularly impactful results?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it really depends on the country and city. So there, in some cities and some countries, there are significant incentives for building owners to undertake certain work. Sometimes that can come through when they are applying for planning permission. So you might get incentives to increase, the planning permission allows you to increase the total space that you're building as long as you implement certain energy efficiency measures. Sometimes in certain countries there are small grants available. Some cities offer that as well. I think, the ones that we've seen as being really effective often combine a little bit of the carrot and the stick, so to speak. So ones like the Tokyo example, the cap and trade program, there was a stick, and they were saying, you have to actually implement a certain amount of energy efficiency or emissions reduction by a certain period, and then if not, you will have to pay, right? And actually what that found was that, well, okay, the company said, we know we have to do it, so we're going to get on with it. But I know that in some cities and countries and state level, they may look at certain buildings and say, well, you're going to struggle because you're smaller, you maybe don't have as deep pockets, so you're still going to have to meet these targets, but they might have certain programs that make available. I know Toronto, where I'm from originally, has sometimes some incentive programs for green roofs, as an example. So there are many. In my previous role, I worked with C40 cities, and we had a huge spreadsheet and database of these kinds of policies. So I can't summarize it in a few minutes, but encourage you to look at a report that they've issued, which is Climate Action in Megacities, and it has a section on buildings and includes a lot of data on what cities are offering just as a start. But there are also programs at a country and regional level.
Great, thank you for that response, Terry. And I mean, you also mentioned that the World Green Building Council are gearing up around COP21 in terms of taking actions to encourage more businesses to implement energy efficient measures. Have you got a good idea of what will be taking place at COP around this?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and we're really excited about COP. The French government, working with UNEP, have really demonstrated quite a bit of leadership, and we've been working with them on having a Buildings Day at COP. And the way that it's looking now is that there will be a few dedicated days to focus on certain sectors, which demonstrate a lot of promise for galvanizing a lot of support from the private sector, but also the public sector. The plans aren't yet confirmed, but we're hoping in the next couple of weeks they will be. And the idea is that over a Buildings Day, we can bring together all the major actors in the building sector, be that the private sector working across construction, various aspects of the value chain in green building and building, but then also all the NGOs like ourselves that represent large networks around the world can come together and really start working through some of the key barriers to further action. So looking at things like finance, measurement and accountability, but we're also looking at this as an opportunity for major corporations to be able to stand up and announce new commitments around their own operations. So we're really hoping that this will galvanize further support and commitment as we try and really support the countries that are signing the treaty at the end of the year.
Great, thank you so much for that, Terry. I think we're going to call it a day there. Thank you so much to all our panelists for this great discussion, and this will be available to download as a podcast after this broadcast is finished, and it will be emailed to you also. The next webinar in the series, in case you're interested, will look at electric vehicle integration, and we've already welcoming Bernard Blattel from BMW and also Jose Vigues from the OECD. So thank you for listening, and don't forget to register for the Sustainable Innovation Forum. Thank you.
Thank you.